The story starts with an average-looking guy named Hito living alone and not doing much. One day, his doorbell rings, and when he checks the camera, he's surprised to see a beautiful woman standing outside. She apologizes for the sudden visit and politely asks if she can be his maid. Hito lets her in, apologizes for the mess, and explains that his parents aren't around. While offering her a drink, he begins to wonder why he let her in so easily. He starts questioning if she's really here to work or if she might be trying to sell something shady or promote something suspicious. With these thoughts in mind, he considers asking her to leave. Curious, Hito asks about her previous jobs as a maid and what her specialty is. To his surprise, she confidently reveals that she's actually a professional assassin, hired to eliminate traitors on behalf of her master. In fact, it was her master who recommended she come to Hito's house. Nervous, Hito asks if she's joking, but when he realizes she's serious, he feels even more anxious. Before asking her to leave, he inquires who her master is. She explains that her master is the grandson of a woman related to the second son of the wife of the cousin of the illegitimate child of her master. Confused, Hito quickly realizes they're complete strangers and begins to panic. Trying to change the subject, Hito asks what kind of assassin she is and what her specialty is. She steps outside into the yard, pauses for a moment, and then expertly throws knives, hitting a tree in a perfect line. Proud of her skills, she explains that while she doesn't often throw knives, she thought it was the best way to show off her abilities. Feeling more uneasy, Hito tells her that he doesn't need anyone killed, doesn't know her master, and isn't in a position to hire her. After hearing Hito say he doesn't need her services, the maid apologizes for wasting his time and leaves. Once she's gone, Hito collapses to his knees, overwhelmed by what just happened and wondering if it was all a dream. As he looks at the ground, he notices something she left behind. Meanwhile, the maid walks sadly down the street, thinking about how Hito called her master a stranger. She wonders what to do next. Just as she reaches the train tracks, she hears Hito calling out to her. He tells her she dropped one of the bells from her hair. As she turns to look at him, she sees a car speeding towards Hito. Without hesitation, she sprints toward him with incredible speed and manages to save him from being hit just in time. The first thing she asks is if Hito is okay. Still in shock, he repeatedly thanks her for saving his life. She apologizes, admitting that she's never saved anyone before, and her heart is racing from the experience. Hito hands her the bell she dropped and thanks her again. He starts to say goodbye, but before she leaves, he stops her, realizing he could use some help with cleaning his house. Back at his place, she sets her entire knife collection on the table, explaining that knives were humanity's first tool and that they can eliminate any target when used properly. Hito quickly interrupts, clarifying that he needs help cleaning the house, not that kind of cleaning. The maid smiles, remembering that cleaning is her specialty. But Hito points to the trash bags, making it clear he's talking about regular chores like taking out the trash, vacuuming, and doing laundry. She finally understands. Reflecting on how she saved his life, Hito decides she's not a bad person after all. He then asks if she'd be willing to stay on as his maid, focusing on regular household tasks. A little later, Hito finds the maid with a bucket on her head and a broken broom, confused about how things got so messy since he had just handed her the cleaning supplies. Trembling, she turns around and apologizes repeatedly. As she tries to walk on the wet floor, she slips but falls gracefully to her knees, catching the broom handles midair with impressive agility, only for the bucket to fall back on her head. Hito asks if she's naturally clumsy, but she begs for forgiveness, saying she keeps making mistakes and doesn't think she can work for him. Gently, Hito removes the bucket from her head and reassures her that it's normal to struggle when you're not used to something. He wraps a towel around her head to drive her off and tells her that they can figure it out together, asking if she's willing to keep helping him. Touched by his kindness and patience, she quietly nods, surprised at how understanding he is. Later, after they finish cleaning the living room, Hito admits that he hadn't been motivated to clean on his own, and thanks her sincerely for her help. Despite all the chaos, he realizes he forgot to eat lunch and asks the maid if she knows how to cook. Seeing her sad, puppy-like expression, he assumes that's a definite no. Still, he stays positive and tells her he already knows what he wants to eat. He suggests she take a shower before they eat together. While in the bathroom, the maid finds herself thinking about Hito's kind smile when he thanked her. Meanwhile, Hito, being a typical teenager, briefly wonders if she might come out of the shower without a towel. To his disappointment, she comes out fully dressed. Afterward, she impresses him with her excellent knife skills as she prepares the vegetables. During this time, Hito realizes she doesn't know what tonkatsu is. She explains that although she may have tried it once, she doesn't remember it because she's not really interested in food. For her, eating is just something necessary to survive, so taste and ingredients don't really matter to her. After hearing that the maid isn't interested in food, Hito tells her it's a shame but insists that this tonkatsu will change her life. His excitement doesn't seem to affect her though. Curious, he asks for her name, and she replies that she doesn't have one as her previous masters always gave her different names. She asks Hito to call her whatever he likes. Unsure, he says he'll just call her Miss Maid because he's not great at coming up with names. She finds this strange as she's never cared about having a name before. As they start eating, Hito asks her what she thinks of the tonkatsu. She struggles to figure out if it tastes good, her mind drifting to some dark memories from her past. However, she does feel a comforting warmth from the food and tells Hito that it's delicious. Slowly, she starts to embrace these new feelings, the warmth from the food, the hot bath, and even Hito's kindness. At that moment, Hito tells her about the room he set up just for her, which surprises her. When she asks if it's really for her, and he says yes, she starts thinking more about her name. She remembers something someone once told her after she completed some unpleasant tasks. Your skin is as white as snow, and your heart is as cold as ice. That's how she got her previous name. But now she realizes she doesn't want Hito to think of her as cold. As Hito notices her eating the tonkatsu plain, he explains that it's meant to be enjoyed with the special katsudon sauce. When she tries it with the sauce, a burst of flavors hits her, leaving her completely fascinated by the experience. It's midnight and Hito wakes up from a recurring dream he hasn't had in a long time. Feeling restless, he heads to the kitchen and notices the door open. Suddenly remembering that the maid is an assassin, he nervously peeks around the corner. He's startled by her silhouette but quickly relaxes when he realizes she's just eating the tonkatsu sauce straight from the container. Embarrassed, she apologizes and explains that she thought if she were to die tomorrow, she wanted to taste the sauce one last time. This gives Hito an idea, so he prepares some more tonkatsu for both of them. They sit outside together, enjoying the food. While eating, she asks if he had a nightmare, explaining that when she went to the kitchen for the sauce, she heard him groaning in his sleep and assumed it was because of something scary, like an assassin. Flustered, Hito asks if she saw him cry, and she nods, confirming that he did and even called out for his mother several times, which makes him feel embarrassed. She then shares a dream she had. In the dream, the tonkatsu sauce invited her to eat as much as she wanted, but just before she could enjoy it, she woke up. She finds it strange because she usually dreams about killing or being killed, but never feels anything, no matter if she wakes up or not. She admits that she never really wanted to dream again, but feels bad for Hito because of his nightmare. What made her feel even worse was not knowing how to comfort him, which left her feeling lonely. Hito apologizes for worrying her and explains that it's a recurring nightmare. He used to have these nightmares often and would wake up crying, only able to fall back asleep on his mother's lap. Hearing this, she quickly offers him to rest his head on her lap, but the unexpected suggestion makes Hoshi nervous. He refuses, saying that he's too old for that now and knows what's appropriate and what isn't. However, when she hears his reasoning, her expression changes. Her face falls and she starts to believe that her only purpose is to take lives, just as the adults who used her for their own purposes often told her. As she begins to spiral into these dark thoughts, Hito suddenly rests his head on her lap, sensing her distress. Without being able to stop himself, he admits how warm and comforting it is to be there. She agrees, sharing the warmth. After a moment, Hito shifts to lie on his back, looking up at her directly. Blushing, she asks if he was able to sleep, and nervously he responds that yes, he did. A maid who had been trained as an assassin felt confused after saving Hito, a man she worked for, in a way that differed from her usual cold approach. Unlike the time she had sent others to their deaths without hesitation, her body had moved instinctively to protect him, and she couldn't understand why. The next morning, as she slashed through the trash to make space before bagging it, Hito asked her why she did that. She explained her reasoning, which impressed him. Soon after, they found a small dog abandoned in front of the house with a note from a man who mistakenly thought Hito was wealthy and would take care of it. Although Hito was initially reluctant to take in the dog, he didn't want it to become an orphan like him. The maid, following the teachings of her training, believed saving the dog out of sympathy would harm its natural survival instincts. She questioned if Hito was ready to take full responsibility for the dog, but he dismissed her concerns. He explained that he wasn't acting out of sympathy, but rather from instinct, just as she had done when saving him. His words affected her deeply, especially when he mentioned that he understood the feeling of abandonment. Hito soon became attached to the dog, while the maid kept her distance, treating the dog as if it were a plague. Hito tried to get her to pet the dog, but she refused, and he realized that she was actually afraid of dogs. Embarrassed, the maid began shaking, and Hito found her reaction endearing. She later explained that during her assassin training, she had been left alone in the mountains with wild, vicious dogs, which had led to her fear. After understanding the maid's trauma and her fear of dogs, Hito acknowledged that she was unfortunate and couldn't help with the dog due to her past experiences. His words, however, left the maid feeling disappointed in herself. Determined to overcome her fear, the maid asked to hold the dog. When she finally did, her fear caused her to tremble. Hito gently asked what specifically scared her, and she pointed out the dog's claws, teeth, and eyes, which she found terrifying. Hito, trying to lighten the mood, joked that the dog looked more like a mochi to him, but the maid didn't quite understand the reference. Suddenly, the puppy nibbled on her finger, making her panic and almost throw the dog. After calming down, they noticed the dog nibbling on Hito's hand as well. Upon checking the puppy's teeth, they realized it was teething, so they decided to take it to the vet. While at the animal hospital, the maid impressed Hito by going out on her own to buy dog supplies. Later that day, during a walk, the maid opened up to Hito. She admitted that she had never met someone as kind as him. Her previous masters had been cold, unforgiving, and only cared about her completing tasks perfectly, with no room for mistakes. In contrast, Hito was gentle with her despite the many mistakes she made. The maid expressed her desire to stay by Hito's side, finding his world filled with warmth, which was completely different from the cold, harsh world of survival and assassination that she was used to. After listening to the maid's feelings, Hito gently pointed out that what she truly wanted was to leave her life as an assassin behind and become a regular girl, something she had never thought about before. Her past had been filled with ending lives, but now with Hito as her new master, she began to find hope. Hito admitted that at first he had been afraid of her, but now he saw her as a good person. His words made the maid reflect on her past, and she asked Hito to help her learn how to be a normal girl. Although Hito didn't know much about girly things, he encouraged her to learn how to accept mistakes and not be too hard on herself. The next morning, the maid was practicing how to cut cabbage, determined to make okonomiyaki, her favorite dish, wanting to pair it with her favorite sauce. While she was focused on her cooking, the dog suddenly appeared by her legs, startling her. She was surprised that a regular dog could sneak up on her, a trained assassin. However, when she heard the dog's stomach growl, she realized it was hungry and gave it some food. As the dog ate, the maid cautiously reached out to pet it, but hesitated when Hito entered the room. He started gently stroking the fluffy dog, and after noticing its round belly, decided to name it Mochi. Hito praised the maid for feeding the dog and chopping the cabbage, offering her a small treat to celebrate. Mochi, filled with energy, began bouncing around playfully, clearly wanting attention. However, Hito explained that he couldn't play at that moment since he needed to focus on preparing dinner. Seeing Mochi's playful state and recognizing the situation, the maid, who had been standing by, stepped in and offered to play with the dog. She did this not only to help out, but also to prove to herself and Hito that she was capable of doing ordinary things, of being a regular girl like he had encouraged her to be. Her desire to believe in Hito's words, that she could be more than what her past had shaped her into, fueled her determination. Hearing the maid's offer to take over and play with Mochi, Hito smiled warmly and told her that he believed in her as well. With this new sense of determination, the maid reached down to pet Mochi. At first, her hands were hesitant, and she moved cautiously, still unsure and a bit scared. However, with each gentle touch, she slowly began to feel more comfortable. As her hand glided over the dog's soft fur, she found herself warming up to it little by little. Soon, the maid was no longer afraid. She began giving Mochi belly rubs and even touched its paws, something she never thought she'd be comfortable doing. In that moment, the maid realized that just as Hito had learned to trust her, she was now beginning to trust the dog. It was a new feeling for her, one that brought her a strange sense of peace and progress, a small but important step in her journey to break free from her assassin past. Later at dinner, the maid tasted the okonomiyaki that Hito had prepared. The flavors were rich and satisfying, and without meaning to, she let out a small, happy sound. It was the first time she had made such a sound without controlling herself. Hito, noticing her reaction, smiled and offered her another serving. Though she initially tried to decline, her body language told a different story. Her eagerness for more was clear in the way her eyes lit up and how her hand hovered near the plate. Sensing her hesitation, Hito reassured her, telling her that it was okay to ask for something if she really wanted it. Taking the chance, the maid nervously asked Hito for something she had never asked before, a name of her own. Hito pauses for a moment, thinking, and asks her about her birth date. Although she doesn't know the exact day, she recalls it being during the winter. With that in mind, Hito suggests the name Yuki, meaning snow. The maid, now named Yuki, feels touched by this gesture, marking another step in her journey toward leaving her old life behind and embracing something new. The name Yuki reminds her of her old master, who had called her cold-blooded, but Hito sees snow in a different way. To him, snow is beautiful, like a protective blanket that covers seeds from the harsh cold, allowing them to eventually bloom into vibrant flowers. Hearing his comforting words and seeing his gentle expression, Yuki begins to understand that life with Hito is much warmer and more beautiful than anything she has ever known. She starts to realize that as long as she stays by his side, she might one day learn what it's like to live a normal life. Filled with deep gratitude, Yuki thanks Hito for giving her a name, her smile shyly breaking through. It is the first time Hito has seen her genuine smile, and he feels a wave of happiness, glad that she is finally able to express herself freely. That marks the end of today's anime recap. If you enjoyed the video and want more of it, please support the channel by leaving a like and subscribe. Let's help us reach a current goal of 10K subscribers.